Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started? And I think a few other people will probably join us as we continue. But my name is Dr. Carla Marquez Lewis. I'm the director for the psychology program, and I want to welcome you to tonight's event, which is the second in our series of 4 under grad school applications. Today's event is applying to graduate school. And just as a reminder, if you joined us last time, we had an event called Preparing for Graduate School. So tonight we're going to take it a step further and talk exactly about what that process looks like and how to best position yourself for those very competitive slots in graduate school. So we have a nice panel here that's joined us, full of academic directors and associate directors to help guide you through this whole process and to give you lots of insight and information that will hopefully be useful as you make this next leap into the graduate school application process. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce people first, and then we'll go ahead and get started. The first is Dr. Mariette Bates from Disability Studies, Professor Ellen Carl from the Health Information Management Program, Dr. Isabel Alicia from Psychology, Dr. Melanie Lorek from Sociology and Human Relations, Dr. Patricia Bartley Daniele from the Nursing Program, Dr. Tara Paulini from Liberal Studies and General Education, and Dr. Tara Barca from Business Program. So we're going to be going through a variety of different topics related to graduate school. And then afterward, we'd like to open it up to you for your questions. And I know some of you submitted them before the presentation, and we do have those. And then we're going to break out into breakout sessions so that you can have some time to talk to people who are directly related to the areas that you're planning on going into, so you can ask discipline-specific questions, okay? And toward that end, if you could change your name from what it is now, just put it in front is fine. The number of the breakout session that you want to go to, once that's posted, we'll have a little key at the bottom. And if you can just adjust your name accordingly, we'll know where you want to go for the breakout rooms later. So I also should say that if you have questions and you want to hold them until the end, that's perfectly fine. If you want to just put them in the chat or the Q&A, that's fine too, and we'll tackle them when we get to that section. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Applying to graduate school is, of course, a very serious decision. You're going to be spending a lot of time and a lot of resources, financial, emotional, intellectual, in this whole process. So why don't we go ahead and start by talking first about the process of deciding to apply. So what will graduate school entail? And a lot of people often want to know, how is it different from undergraduate degree programs? So we're going to have Dr. Bates start us off by really tackling these two questions under this topic and giving us some insight into that area.
Hi. So many people think that they would like to go to graduate school, and most of the time that is in order to achieve a credential that's going to help them in their career. But there are some real considerations that are very important before you even start to apply. One of them has to do with time. One of the biggest issues that our students have, our current master's students, is that they have underestimated the amount of time that it takes to actually do the work in graduate school. I want to say that in my experience, graduate school is somewhat less intense sometimes than bachelor's programs are, because in bachelor's programs, you tend to take more courses and you have more exams instead of papers and so forth. But graduate school requires typically a lot of reading and writing. And if you don't have the time to do that because of your work responsibility or because of your family responsibilities, it might be good to put it off for a little while until you are able to really put the time and the energy in. So that's one consideration. The other is, of course, financial. Graduate school typically provides less financial support in terms of tuition support than bachelor's programs do, particularly at a school like CUNY, where so many of our students graduate with very little debt because of TAP grants or Pell grants that they get. In graduate school, it's mostly student loans that people get. They're limited tuition support. So it's very, very important for you to know what you're getting into before you even apply. So that's number two. Number three, before you apply, you really should think carefully about what this degree is really going to mean for you. You don't want to have buyer's remorse that you applied for a graduate school and you went to a program that you thought was going to get you, a particular place in your career, and instead, it's not what you expected. So I think it's very important for you. Eartha, hello, come on, Earth, down, come on. Sorry, it's my 18-year-old cat. She likes to come to these. So it's very important for you to really make sure that the program you're applying to is going to provide you with the information and the learning and the credential that you want in order to succeed in your career. I have students that, I'm the director of the Disability Studies program, and we're looking at applications now at the admissions committee. And one of the things that students often say is, I want to come to your master's program because I want to be a special education teacher. But my program doesn't prepare you to be a special education teacher, and it doesn't prepare you to be a social worker. So if you want a particular credential, you need to be very, very sure that the program you're applying to is going to give you that particular credential that you want. And that when you graduate, you're going to be satisfied with the learning that you got and with the credential that you got. So I would say those are the three considerations before you even apply that you need to think long and hard about and do some research about before you even get to the application process.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Come on.
Okay.
I can add something.
Sure.
So I just wanted to add something to keep in mind is that you're not, when you apply to grad school, very often you are a little bit older. And so the expectations you have out of life are a little bit different from those you had when you were an undergrad. So when you were an undergrad, maybe you were happy living in a dorm and not having real furniture. But as a grad student, you're an adult very often, and you are used to having adult things. And that's part of what complicates the graduate school experience, because even if you receive financial support, even if you are in a PhD program and you're receiving a tuition waiver and you have some sort of stipend, it's not going to be the same as having a job. And you'll be listening to people around you who have real jobs, so to speak, and who are working full time and who have different opportunities than you have. So vacations may not be an option. There are a lot of different things that you may have to reconsider and put off in your life just because you decided to go to grad school. And so it's a really serious decision, as Dr. Bates said, and it's something to really take into account and to consider where you are in your life and how it fits with the life that you presently have. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and to think about, whether or not the school that you're applying to will allow you to attend part-time versus full-time, so that you can kind of work your schedules around that. So let's say that you've decided that you've weighed all of the pros and the cons, you've done your research about whether or not graduate school is right for you. And now you're at the point of having decided that you do intend to apply to graduate school. How do you go about choosing a program and or a school? So we're going to talk a little bit about identifying schools and identifying programs, and also how many programs should you choose. So if we can see that slide just to kind of frame our questions, Professor Carl will tackle this and give us a little bit of insight. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Once again, thanks for joining us tonight. So things to think about when you're applying and or you've decided to apply. I guess my first suggestion, of course, would be start with the internet, do a big search, put in all your keywords of what you think you're looking for in a program. But also don't eliminate other specialty areas like professional associations that might recommend a given program, or in the case of health information management, there is a specialty accreditor out there, CAHIM, that accredits masters in HIM programs. So I would say just do your best to do a global search of the program that you're looking for. You just using the internet. I'm sure there's other resources out there that perhaps my colleagues would recommend, but that would be where I would start. And then once you identify some schools that you're looking at, I would, as Dr. Bates said, I would look closely at that curriculum. I was talking to a colleague today who also teaches in our HIM program, and she said, "Ooh, I have an MBA." She went for a master's of, I don't remember what it was, but she said, "Ooh, I could never do an MBA. There's too much math in that." So she steered away from the ones with the math. So, so really take a hard look at the curriculum. Are these courses that you're going to enjoy taking? Or you look at the list of the courses and you say, "Woo, this is really not what I want to do." So really take a hard look at the courses, take a serious look at what the course descriptions are, and then a description of the program. Because as you heard from Dr. Bates, her program does not wind up having folks work as work in special education. It's just not that program. So, be a cautious consumer when you're looking at all of these programs. Also, another thing to consider, and we already touched on it a little bit, is how many credits are there in the program, and how does that relate to your finances? Because it does equate to your finances. So just, and I tell students this all the time who are working who are asking me about specifically about the HIM program. I did an MBA, and with a concentration in health administration, I did 54 credit hours in that program. Right now, our master's in health information management, which did not exist at the time I took my program, it's 33 credits. So you can tell there's a big difference in your pocketbook. So take a look at how many credits the programs are that you're looking at. I mean, maybe one would just totally steer you away from that program based on what you have in finances and how much you can get in those loans that Dr. Bates was mentioning, because for the most part, it is going to be based on, you're going to need loans for many of these programs. And I guess this is an important one. Where's the program or college located? Is it an online program? Is it not? Will you need to relocate? Is it fully online? There's all questions you need to think about. Do you want to do a fully online program, or is the program that you're looking at located someplace and you have face-to-face classes that you'll need to attend? So that's a huge consideration, of course. One other important thing is the college that you're looking at regionally accredited? This is really important. There are 6 regional accrediting bodies throughout the United States. Here in New York, we're accredited by Middle States. It's very important. I have I had someone come and was applying to be an adjunct for me and our HIM program. And when I went she said she had a doctorate, and when I went to go look at what her doctorate was, it was not from a regionally accredited college. How sad. So I couldn't hire her to teach at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. And frankly, it was a shock to her when I told her that this degree is not from a regionally accredited college. She was shocked, and it was really bad news that I had to deliver, but I did. So please make sure you check out the accreditation status of any college that you're looking at. Let's see, again, Carla mentioned full-time versus part-time. Will the college you're looking at accept part-time students? Sometimes some don't. Sometimes some you have to be full-time students. And then I guess the next question that I am talking about today is how many programs should I choose? And I guess some of that depends on your pocketbook, because it does cost usually to submit applications. How many of the programs that you looked at, you did this big, this big search, environmental scan of all the programs you want to look at, and review. How many looked really interesting to you? And that might decide for you how many you should apply to. And then lastly, and sometimes we did this at the baccalaureate level as well, is one of these programs a safe program that you think you're pretty secure in getting into? And, do you want to apply to a stretch school? Is there one that you really would love to go to? You're not quite sure if you have the right credentials, but maybe you want to apply to one that's safe and one that's a stretch, maybe somewhere in the middle. I don't know, but these are the things you would need to consider when you're trying to decide on what programs to choose. So I don't know if any of my colleagues have any other comments about any of those things. Be happy to listen.
I mean, the one thing I would add too is to take into consideration their acceptance rates. So if you can find that information, that's a really good thing to think about. In PhD programs, if you're applying to master's programs, they're going to take more students. If you're applying to PhD programs, they have limited slots. In mine and Dr. Alicia's field in psychology, you might have 3 to 7 slots a year open in certain programs. And when that's the case, you're going to have to apply to more schools, right? To increase your odds of getting in. So that's something that I would add to take into consideration. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would, hi everyone. I would also add that when you're looking for programs to apply to ask people who are in the field that you want to go into. So for instance, when I was applying for my PhD in English, I asked people of faculty that I knew in my specialization, the specialization that I wanted, where I should apply, because there's hundreds of English programs across the country, but I wanted a program specializing in rhetoric and composition, and I wanted specific things within that field, and they were very helpful to me. So don't forget to use your faculty members or maybe mentors in other areas that you have for advice.
So once you've decided to apply, and once you've done your homework and you've done your research and you're thinking about applying, we talked last week about things that you should be doing now, but you can only do so much planning and preparation. So if you actually get to that point of applying to a school and you realize that they have pre-admission courses, a real question is, what should you do if pre-admission courses are required? So why don't we shift over to Dr. Polini to talk a little bit about, when this is the case that pre-admission courses would be required, and what to do if you need them, and really what to do if you don't have them too.
Right, so pre-admission courses simply mean courses at the undergraduate level that you need to have, and you need to usually pass with a certain level of proficiency in order to be admitted to the program. So say, for example, psychology often requires that you have introduction to psychology, research methods, and statistics, and that you pass those courses as well, sometimes with a C or better, sometimes higher, it depends on the program. So it really just means courses at the undergraduate level that the graduate program wants you to have already completed. That's going to really vary from program to program. So again, you're going to have to do research and figure out what are these courses, if there are any at all. Now, if you've found that maybe you're toward the end of your undergraduate career and you've decided to apply to different programs and you don't have these pre-admission courses, you should still reach out to the programs and talk to them about potential conditional admission. So a lot of times programs will admit you if everything else looks good, and they decide you're a good fit for their program, they might admit you conditionally, say that you have to take these courses first within a certain amount of time and get a certain grade. Sometimes you can take them as you're taking other graduate classes. Sometimes you have to take them first. So again, it's a lot of variance. So you really have to do your due diligence, talk to folks at these programs, and find out what these requirements might be.
Others?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. And I'm going to give an example from the nursing program. A lot of our courses start with advanced. So for example, pathophysiology is an advanced patho in the graduate nursing program, but you have to have the prerequisite in an undergraduate program. So that has come up, with us in admissions. And often if the student is really looking very seriously to continue her graduate education as they end their baccalaureate, they will pick up that course in their current institution, or the scenario that was discussed, they can take it at SPS and be a conditional admit. So important to look at what the prereqs are. And I think going back to the prior discussion of what the curriculum is, because you may have an undergraduate prereq that you need to complete.
Any others?
Yeah, I wanted to say that sometimes I know that for certain programs, you need to have a recent prerequisite. So for example, I know that there are some statistics courses that you may have taken 10 years ago, but you may need to take a more recent statistics course for some programs. So it's important to check, to kind of check those out. And there may be other prerequisites that the program would like you to have taken within the last 4 or 5 years, for example.
Anyone else want to add anything about their specific programs?
Well, I could jump into, oops, sorry, Isabel.
Go ahead.
Just for the health information management program, we do have a series of, there's 5 actual co-requisite courses. The students can take them while they are in the master's program. The main reason for this is we want the students who do not have a background in health information management, who we do accept into our program. We need them to be prepared because we're preparing them for a credentialing exam after they finish the master's program. And these are courses that have content that are definitely needed in order to be successful on that exam. So typically, if you have a bachelor's in health information management, sometimes in health services administration as well, you've met all of those co-requisite courses. It usually is someone else who's coming from a totally different field who want to get that master's in health information management. And it's about 5 classes. Statistics is one. Yes, everybody here, statistics. So statistics is one, as well as a few other very specific classes like medical terminology, pathophysiology, which was mentioned for nursing, a few more courses.
In psychology, we have a similar system of allowing conditional admission, where you can enter our program coming from a different field and take our pre-admission courses through our undergraduate program. And if you complete them with a B or higher, then you have the possibility of moving on to our master's program. The advantage of that is that you get to meet our faculty already if you take the courses through us. And also CUNY tends to be a little bit more affordable than other colleges. Very often students will scramble to take pre-admission courses elsewhere, but why not, come to CUNY and get them here, meet the faculty, see if our program is suitable for you, meaning that if the online format works for you, and experience also what we offer in the classroom, just generally speaking. So pre-admission courses are an option to take, on your way into the master's program in psychology.
It's true that depending on the program or the school, oftentimes if you're admitted into the school, you will get a little bit of a break on tuition because you will get matriculated rates, meaning you're in the school, in the program, even though you're not yet taking classes in the program, rather than paying non-degree rates. So it can also be a little bit cheaper that way. So let's talk a little bit about transcripts, because these are usually a place where people find themselves in a little bit of trouble because transcripts can be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to pass things over to Dr. Barca, and she can talk a little bit about which transcripts people need to provide, and then how to get them, when to get them, and the whole process of that entails transcripts.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. So the first thing I'd like to say about transcripts is request them ASAP. That's my advice. You know, as soon as you decide that you'd like to apply to a program, that's normally one of the first things I would say to do, because if that is delayed in any way, it will hold up your application. Your application cannot be submitted without an official transcript. Keep in mind that official means that it does not come from you, the potential student. It comes from your prior institutions. So there's two ways you can do this. The first way is to request a paper transcript be mailed from the registrar of your prior institutions to SPS. I would say that the faster way would be to request an electronic transcript, which would mean that the prior registrars would typically email your transcript to SPS. That normally happens, I would say, within a week. The paper transcripts could take several weeks, depending on what's going on with the, you know, and one other very important point is if you have any financial holds on your accounts from your prior institutions, they will not send out the transcript for you. So it's very important to make sure that you do not have any financial holds on your accounts. You're going to need to submit transcripts from all prior institutions. They have to be official, again, coming directly from your prior schools. And that includes for both undergraduate and graduate work. Even if you did not graduate from a school, we would still need to see the transcript, the official transcript. So ensure there's no financial holds. Make sure to request them ASAP as soon as you decide you'd like to apply, and make sure that they are official. They are not coming from you in any form. They would be coming directly from the registrars of your prior schools that you attended. I think that I've covered everything there. Keep in mind, most, you know, some places ship them for free, especially if they're electronic. There typically isn't a charge. Sometimes if you need it expedited, there will be a special handling charge. I know that if it's coming from CUNY, from one CUNY to another, there is no charge. And make sure you account for any holidays or weekends, because that could also delay things as well. Did I miss anything?
I would only add that if you're an SPS student as an undergrad, they can pull them for you, but you do need to request that from admissions for them to do that. Anyone else want to add anything about transcripts? Dr. Lorik?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add, if you happen to have attended an undergrad school internationally, not in the US, it can get, it's possible. And I did my undergrad and my MA in Germany, but Germany, for instance, they don't have transcripts in the same way. So what often happens is that the entire logic that exists here just doesn't exist in the country where you might have taken some courses. And so what you will do is you will really have to start now, because you will have to call offices, do some research of what is accepted, and try to figure out how something that would be accepted in the US school can be produced in the country, in the university in which you've taken your undergrad outside of the US. And that will depend. So you will have to do a lot of legwork here. And at my time, it was paper that had to be produced and then mailed to the US. And so I make sure you really try to talk to people. The good news is that, at least in my experience, everyone will be trying to help you. and everyone will be very understanding and trying to figure it out. You just have to try to, get to talk to people and, pick up the phone ideally and really try to figure it out.
I see a few questions in the chat. Betty has a good question. Ideas for a school that no longer exists. That's a bit tricky because if the school doesn't exist, they do not have a registrar. My advice would be to, if you have an unofficial transcript, try to submit that, speak to our admissions office and see if that would be acceptable. Beyond that, I'm not really sure. Does anybody else have any idea for a school that is no longer in existence?
If this was the school taken over by another school, because that actually happened to me, not as a student, but as a professor. So one school that I worked at was taken over by another school, and I had to go back and find my retirement from that first school. So I had to actually go through the second school, the new school. So if it's been taken over, you might be able to go through the new school's registrar and get the transcript that way. Good luck.
I think I've also seen that if the school was regionally accredited by one of the regional accrediting bodies, you might find that school was closed on their website, and I think it directs you to where your transcript should be located. But you would have to do some searching to figure out where that school was and if they were regionally accredited. I've seen that maybe once.
Someone else in the chat asked, is 8 months in advance, Trisha, hi Trisha, is 8 months in advance of applying too early to begin requesting or sending transcripts? To my mind, that seems a little early, because if a deadline to apply is 8 months in the future, that program may not be ready for your application. So maybe wait a little bit of time. You can do it a little early, but I think 8 months might be a little much. I don't know what my colleagues think of that.
Yeah, I think you'd want to see when the application portal opens for that period of time. So, in some PhD programs, if you're thinking about a program like that, sometimes the deadline is March for an August start, but it opens in December, right? So you can start applying then, but that should be a good guide for you. So aside from transcripts, which are a very important piece of the process, one of the most important pieces is your letter, or are your letters of recommendation. So Dr. Bartley-Daniele will start us off talking about this area that is so confusing to students about how to obtain letters of recommendation and who should write them.
Well, first of all, I would say that the most important thing is to read the directions on the application because it may guide you in terms of who you are going to select to write a letter of reference. Many of the letters of reference can be checkoffs and then an area for narrative that really would support not only your, say, current talents, but your potential for graduate study. And again, I will refer to nursing, and the student is required to have a letter of reference from a nurse educator, which could be from their academic program or in their job setting of a clinical nurse educator, and also of a nursing leader. So where you could get a few bumps in the road is that the letter and the relationship you have with the person that is writing the recommendation may not be a professional relationship. So I think that's the key point. And then to get it down and dirty about it, have the potential in terms of thinking about who you are going to ask and that they will meet the deadlines, and make sure you follow up. So often you request the letters of reference to be, and they'll be sent directly to the school, and the deadline starts to pass and your application may be incomplete because the reference was not either received or was not written. So very, very important in terms of follow-up. And you are certainly want to do it before deadlines because the application can stay incomplete if it's missing a reference.
Dr. Lorick?
Yes, I want to add a few things. So one thing is, and I'm seeing Betty's question in the chat too about how to request a recommendation from a professor who's online and you don't really know them. Email the professor and try to refresh a professor's memory, say what courses you took, what assignments you've written, what you liked about the course, possibly to kind of get on a good page, and ask if the professor would be willing to write a letter. And one thing that I wanted to add is what's important, and I think not all students might be aware, is that professors are not required to write a letter for you. They want to write a letter and want to support students, but professors don't have to do this, and they have the right to refuse. And so you have to ask first if a professor is willing to write the letter. And if the professor says, well, I might not be the best person or something, try to find somebody else, because you definitely do not want to get a bad letter of recommendation, and you want to avoid that, and kind of try to take the hint, so to speak, and move on if your professor is not willing.
Dr. Polini?
Thank you, Professor Lork. You said many of the things I was going to say. I think I'll answer maybe Dan's question here in the chat. Sometimes we might have access to that information, although I've been told recently that courses from a year ago are going to be not available, or they shouldn't be available. So I don't count on us having access to your work from 3 or 4 years ago. So, it depends maybe on the program. I know sometimes I have work that I've saved, but I don't save every student's work from every class. It's just not, there's no way I can save all of that. So I would say if you're going to be applying to grad school, or you're thinking about it, and you have a sense of maybe which professors you might want to ask for letters of recommendation from, save that work yourself. You make a file and put it aside, because if you can send, say, a really good paper or project to your professor when you ask them for a letter of recommendation, that can be really helpful. When students have done that for me, and that has jogged my memory, but it's also given me something substantive to talk about, more than just my impressions from what I remember of that person, and maybe from the grade. Yeah.
Dr. Alicia?
So something to keep in mind is that you have to be strategic. That's, I think, some of what Dr. Polini was alluding to. You have to think about who you want a letter of reference from. You have to think about whose course you've done well in, and you have to communicate with the person. Now, we are your professors at SPS, and we know you, and you know us. It may seem like because we haven't met face to face that we don't know each other, but we do. We're reading your discussion board posts. Sometimes every week we are reading your papers, we're reading your case studies, we're looking at your quizzes, and we care about you very often, and we have an interest in your progress, and it excites us to see you doing well. So come to office hours, stop by, have a conversation with a faculty member if you're planning on going further into that field, furthering your education in that particular field, and talk to that person about what it's like to be a psychologist, what it's like to be a sociologist, what it's like to be in business, what it's like to be in the field that that person is in. And that's one way to further build a relationship. But you should always keep in mind that we are real people. We're behind a computer screen and we may not always see each other, but we're reading your thoughts. And what's more intimate than reading someone's thoughts, really, in many ways. So we do know you, and you do know us, whether you know it or not. And one last thing. After you get a letter of recommendation, if you get into the program, even if you don't get into the program, follow up. Let the person know that you got in. We love to get the follow-ups and to find out that someone is doing well. And it's one way that you're guaranteed to get someone congratulating you, which you may not always get in your personal life. Yeah, we know you.
Dr. Parker?
I just wanted to add, I think, I appreciate it when I get requests from students for letters of recommendation, if they include information in their requests about why they'd like to, go to this program. Why do they want to enroll in this program? What makes them excited about the program? How does it fit into their academic and career aspirations? What sets the program apart from others? Those kind of personal details, instead of just kind of sending me a form letter saying, I was in your course 3 years ago, can you write this letter for me? I'd like to know about how it really fits into what you'd like to do currently in the future. And then the other piece of advice I'd like to give is, if there's an option for you to waive your right to review the letter of recommendation, it's very important that you do. It's better for the person writing the letter to be able to say with complete confidence and with complete honesty what their recommendation is, without because sometimes there is that option whether or not you can review the letter. So I always say, please make sure that you tick the box that you waive your right to review.
That's great advice. Professor Carl.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing as well. Oftentimes when students ask me for a recommendation letter, of course, the same thing that who said it? Dr. Polini said, we do remember you. We remember you. Even a few years out, I have students who say, oh, do you remember me? I had you last semester. Like, of course I remember you. But that being said, one thing sometimes I ask students for is an updated resume, or when I'm writing a recommendation letter, because some students are working in the current field of health information management or health services administration, and ask them, where they expect to go afterwards. But it gives me a really good idea of what they've done, even more so than what I've learned about them in the course. But it's really helpful to have that sometimes on hand when I'm writing a recommendation. So I usually ask for it. So
I just added some questions. When students ask me for letters of recommendation, I send them this list of questions, and I ask them, just to remind me when they entered into the school and the program, and, some questions about, any experiences they've had, a volunteer, etc. And then I always end by asking them, is there anything else I should mention or highlight? Are there things they want me to really stress in that letter? Obviously, I'm going to do my research and make sure those things, align with how I feel about the student and their work, but you'll probably end up getting some kind of list of questions that your recommender wants from you to be able to craft a really good letter for you. The last thing I would mention is make it easy on your recommender. Put all the information together rather than streams of emails, all of the schools you want to apply to, all of the due dates, everything in a file, papers, the answers to the questions, et cetera. The easier you can make it on them, the more likely they're going to have them on time. How they're going to be quick, they're going to be responsive, and it's going to make for a really easy journey for both of you. So that would be my last tips of advice. Does anyone else want to add anything else about letters of recommendation?
I just wanted to address a question. I believe it was Leanne. She asked, what is the purpose of waiving your right to review the letter? And I think it's important because in doing so, the admissions committee can be assured that what the recommender is saying in the letter is accurate. It shows that you trust the contents of the letter. So I think it's very important to waive the letter because it demonstrates to the admissions committee that they can really be rest assured that the contents of the letter are not altered in any way based on the knowledge that the student might read it.
And many faculty members won't write letters. I won't write a letter for a student who won't waive their right to review it. And I think the reason for that is because I want to be able to say what I have to say. And a lot of times it's gushing things I want to say about a student, and I want to be able to do that. If I don't feel that I can say something good about a student, I won't agree to write the letter to begin with. So I think students don't need to worry that their professors are going to agree to write a letter for them and then say negative things about them. So, you should feel pretty confident in waiving that right. Anything else?
I think that Betty asked, does the letter have to be from a professor or can it be from an employer? And to my knowledge, 2 are required for our graduate program. I would recommend 1 be from a professor and 1 be professional, from somebody who really knows you and who can really attest to the quality of your work, giving specific details, not really just a general letter. Does anybody else want to add anything to that about, do you think 2 should come from professors, or would 1 be appropriate from an employer in your programs?
I just would say that if you've been out of school for a while and you're going back to school, it might be difficult to track down a professor to get a recommendation from. And so I would say in that case, probably, 2 business type recommendations would be great if you just don't have somebody to contact if you graduated a while ago.
Right. And remember that, why do we want these? We want your recommender to tell us that they believe that you're ready to study on the graduate level. So we want someone that is in a position that has evaluated your work on some level, right? So we were, talking before this session started, we've gotten letters from spouses, mothers, aunts, best friends, and they may be able to attest to your character, but they're not the most objective person to be writing a letter. So when you're finding, you're looking for somebody to write this letter of recommendation for you, that's really what we're looking for. We want the person to be able to tell us that you have qualities that are going to help you to succeed in the program. And that's, so a supervisor at work would be perfectly appropriate. A professor, if you can, if you've graduated recently and you have a relationship with them, but not a relative and not someone who is, not going to be objective about your ability to do graduate level work.
So along the same lines of things that you need for your application, in some cases you might need specific exams. So why don't we go ahead and shift a little bit to Dr. Bartley Daniele, who can talk a little bit about which exams are needed and how to approach those.
I, again, always look at the directions for the application. There is the graduate record exam, there's the MAT, the Miller Analogies test, and those are the common ones. There are specialty tests also, like LSAT for law school. To my knowledge, there are not any grad GREs or MATs for the graduate programs at SPS. But what is important is to look at, is there a minimum score that you need to attain? And also, I think going back to what other people have spoken about, there may be a limit in the number of seats in the program for admission. Reflect also on the test. The GRE is reading, writing, and math. So it's kind of a little bit of everything. The MAT is more about analogies. And if you have your choice, you would select the exam that you would be good at. I only caution you, though, that some schools will accept GREs, but not the MAT, and vice versa. So it then goes back with preparation in terms of looking at the application and the schools you're interested in. And also factoring in time so that you can review that content. There's many online prep classes to assist you. There are even some free tests at the beginning where you can take and really see how well you do for those exams. But time is a factor. If that is added to the application as a requirement, that score needs to be in by the time the deadline. So you need to think about that, especially if you need to take a prep course, which even at basic, you would need to be familiar with the content of the graduate exam that you need to take.
Anyone want to add anything to that? Great. So next week, we're going to be, and if we could see the next slide, we'll be talking about one of the other key components to your application, which is the personal statement. But we're going to put a pin in that for now because it's such an in-depth conversation. We're gonna separate that out from this conversation, and we'll be talking next week about personal statements and how to actually write an effective personal statement. So for now, we're going to shift away from personal statements and talk about another important piece of the process, which are interviews. So Dr. Alicia is going to talk to you about, whether all programs require an interview. How do you prep for an interview? What do they entail?
Most master's programs do not require an interview. Interviews often are used at the master's level as follow-up. There are some programs that may require interviews. So MSW programs, for example, are more likely to require an interview than, for example, a master's program in psychology. PhD programs always require an interview. And in some cases, you'll have interviews both with the faculty, and you'll also have interviews with the students, and there may be other different processes as part that are where there are group interviews in some cases, for example. In terms of how to prepare for the interview, the most important thing to keep in mind is that this is a professional meeting. So you should show up the same way you would for a job application. Think of yourself as being assessed. Think of yourself as being tested to a certain extent. You're being evaluated. So you should be professional in appearance, professional in how you speak. If the interview is online as opposed to in person, try to avoid having loud noises and distractions. You're going to have time to plan ahead. These are pre-scheduled, they're not done impromptu. It's very rare that a graduate program will call someone and put the person on the spot. I mean, I've heard of that happening once maybe, but typically this is scheduled ahead of time. And since it's scheduled ahead of time, you have the possibility of figuring out what the best space is physically for you to be in for this particular professional meeting. Now, when you're doing the interview, keep in mind that whether the interview is with a faculty member or it's with students in the program, again, they're still evaluating you. They're not there to be your buddies. They're trying to get information about how you will fit in the program, and we'll get to fit in a moment. And part of how you prepare for showing that you will fit and that you are a good candidate for the program is by doing your research. So just as my colleagues have said, look up the instructions. Look up the instructions for applying for the program. Look up details about the curriculum of the program. You should be able to tell them what classes you're excited about. You should be able to tell them which faculty you're interested in working with. You should also be able to talk about how being in graduate school will impact your life, and impact your life not just in terms of you want to be a therapist or something like that, but in terms of what you'll have to shift and how you'll have to adjust and how prepared you are for those adjustments. And then finally, your rationale for going to grad school should be professional as opposed to just personal. We all like a good sob story. We like to hear a success story. We love those, reality TV moments where the contestant says, I survived 5 million different hardships and I've emerged victorious. We love that. But we also want to know what you're aiming to do career-wise. And it has to go beyond just, I want to help people, because there's so many ways that you can help people. And that's something that I think very often, in particular with psychology, students forget. So come prepared, be professional, and know that you're being tested.
Anyone else want to add anything to that? I think the only other thing I would add is that to keep in mind that you're also interviewing them. So you're also trying to figure out whether or not this is the right place for you. So just like you would if you were going to a job interview, come armed with some questions that you have for them. Things that you want to know about the program, things that you want to know about funding, questions that you have, your own questions that will help decide whether or not, one college or university is a good fit for you or not. So, do your homework. So in addition to interviews, Dr. Alicia alluded to this idea of fit. So Dr. Laura, can you talk a little bit about what role fit plays in the admissions process and what fit is, and if there's anything as a student can do to make their fit more apparent?
Yeah, fit is, I think it's this very elusive category. It's really hard to put your finger on it, but it's really important. It's important to the admissions committee and seeing if you are fit, but it's also important to you and seeing if those 2, 4, 6 years you are going to invest are actually worthwhile investing in, right? And so what fit is really this alignment of what are my goals in terms of skills and knowledge, in terms of credentials, what Dr. Bates mentioned at the very beginning of this session. Am I going to get the credentials I need? But it's also what kind of professional and intellectual community am I going to enter? What's the social network and what are the relationships that I want to make in professionally in the next 2-4 years? And will the program I'm applying to allow me to achieve these goals? And so you have to, this is the moment where you have to do a lot of research and really go into the weeds for each program and see what courses are being offered, what credentials am I getting, what kind of professors are teaching these courses, what are their research interests, are they working with students? Is that something I'm interested in, right? And it depends obviously on the program you want to look at, but you really need to do this research. And I would also, I think the question came up earlier, how many programs to apply for. If you cannot do this research for many, many programs, I would consider kind of slim it down because you will have to do it to write a strong application. And to, if there's an interview, to have a strong interview because they will, fit will come up and it doesn't come up directly, but it will come through in every response you're giving and in every question you're asking. And fit also matters from the school's perspective in the sense that they are going to want to know, will the student be able to be successful given the goals they have, right? Can we actually graduate the student successfully? But then also for schools that, let's say, have a lab or have a lot of research collaboration, research assistants, they want to know if your skills and your interests benefit the school and what they're doing. And if there are professors who are like, I really want to work with that student because, kind of the very specific skill set that student brings in is very exciting to me and I can see how I can work with that student. But yeah, it requires a lot of homework on your end.
Anything anyone wants to add?
I just wanted to jump in and add, when it comes to fit, I try to think of it in terms of 2 different types of fit. One is the applicant institution fit. How do you fit into the institution as a whole? And then the other is the applicant program fit. And that's where we're really getting into the weeds about the specific details of the program. And I think when you're discussing, how you fit, especially in your personal statement, really be authentic, and be yourself. We don't want generic responses. We really want to know about things that, of course, that happen inside the classroom, but how you can make contributions outside of the classroom as well. How you think that the program in particular will help you to achieve your goals in terms of, positive social change outside of the classroom. Ideas like that. Avoid generic statements, but try to think of it in terms of your fit with the institution as well as the specific program.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Alicia?
So I wanted to add a little something about credentials and licensure, because I saw some questions in the chat. So very often when we think about our career goals, our career ambitions, we just think, oh, I want to be a psychologist. And we don't think of the fact that there are, maybe 14 different programs in psychology, 14 different types of psychology. You heard Dr. Paulini refer to different types of programs in English. There are different types of programs in nursing and sociology in all of our fields. Dr. Bates mentioned that students sometimes will apply to her program and ask if they can be special education teachers. And that's not what her program does. For us in psychology, students often come and they would like to be psychologists in schools. That's not what our program offers. That would be a school psychology program. So fit isn't just person program fit in terms of, but person's career goals and program fit. And you might come to a program and be a fantastic student and make fantastic contributions, but if in the end you can't achieve your career goals, that's a problem, because graduate school is too expensive for you to, end up somewhere that does not help you get to where you'd like to go.
Great. So we want to wind down the evening, at least this portion of it, before we go to answer your questions and to move into breakout rooms, to really kind of peel the curtain back. This is really where I think it's so advantageous to have this group of panel members here, because they all serve on admissions committees currently, or have served on them in the past. And the whole point of these events is really to give you a behind the scenes look at what you wouldn't know otherwise unless someone told you. So I'm going to pose this question very generally to all of our panel members. What are admissions committees looking for when they're making these decisions? Who wants to start? Dr. Bates?
Yeah, hi. So in my program, as I mentioned, one of the things that our committee is looking for is that the applicant understands what disability studies is and what it isn't. Disability studies isn't a brand new academic discipline. There are other programs in the country, but it's not a special ed degree. It's not a social work degree. We don't study a particular disability. So one of the things we're looking for is that a student understands something about disability or has a reason to apply to the program in particular, and that they understand what it might be able to provide for them and what it can't. And a lot of what our graduates, at least certainly in our Masters of Arts programs in disability studies, a lot of what students receive from the program depends on their interests as they're coming into the program, because it's one of those interdisciplinary degrees. So that's the first thing. In our Masters of Science program, we're really preparing students for a particular job. So if that student who applies indicates to us that they have another career goal, one of the things the admissions committee would ask is for me to call them and talk to them about it, because we're preparing people to provide academic, accommodations to students with disabilities. We're not preparing them to be academic advisors or to work necessarily in admissions office, or to do something, or to work in a K-12 system or something like that. So I need to understand that the student who is applying, that their goals are congruent with what the program is going to provide for them. I don't want the students to have, or the applicants to have buyer's remorse that, we admit you to the program, you go through it, and then when you graduate, you can't use the degree in the way you hoped. So, so that's the most important thing, is that elusive fit, as Dr. Lorick was talking about, that we want to make sure that that the student really understands what they're getting themselves into, so that when they graduate, they're happy that they went to our disability studies program.
Any others want to add?
Yeah, I'd just jump in and say the same thing, that very similar to what Mariette just mentioned. The admissions committee does review the essays. We want to make sure the students know what health information management is. It's very much a niche profession, and we want to know that you understand it. It's not a clinical field. You know, we do get all sorts of applications, and it's kind of clear that the student doesn't really know what health information management is. But if they're a good candidate, we will do the same thing. Someone from the committee will call the student just to go over, are you sure this is what you're looking for the same reasons? We want you to be successful in our program, and we certainly don't want you to have, as Mariette mentioned, buyer's remorse. And, you know, we certainly don't want you to spend all this money and start the program and then drop out because it's really not what you were looking for. So to the same, really very similar to what Dr. Bates mentioned, we do want to make sure that it's that fit is there.
Dr. Bartley-Daniele?
Yeah, I would say one of the most important things is not just looking at the position that you currently have or held or the job description, but that we really look at how the applicant has contributed in that role. And again, in particular with nursing, we evaluate whether academically and or clinically have they been involved with an evidence-based practice initiative or a quality assurance initiative, not just as a participant, but if they have contributed to that. And those are the things often in the personal statements that we will open our eyes in terms of seeing a potential there for a master's prepared nurse to contribute to the profession and, you know, to the society as a whole.
Thank you. And Dr. Alicia, if you can wind us down, and then we'll move to breakout rooms.
So just to wrap up, psychology is an evidence-based field. So as Professor Patricia Bartley-Daniele was saying, if we look for students who have experience or who at least have an appreciation for research and an understanding that, you know, you're coming in with a particular path that you're going to follow, you're going to have to complete a capstone in the psychology program. And so what I'm looking for is someone who appreciates that we are a research-based field and who seems to have the desire, if not all the qualifications necessary, to complete a research project. Because you can come into the program with minimal research experience, but it's hard to come into the program if you have no interest in doing research at all. So again, do your research, look at what the program requires, and that will answer a little bit the question of what admissions committees are looking for.
Great, thank you. So we're going to hold the question portion for the breakout rooms. I just want to quickly remind you of our next two events. So next week we have the personal statement writing workshop. So you can come to that event, and we're going to go a lot more into depth about that personal statement, how to write it. And then we're going to do breakout rooms into little workshops based on your field and your subdiscipline to talk more about what's maybe specific or unique to a particular discipline. And then 2 weeks later is the CV writing workshop, which is another piece of the puzzle of the application. Oftentimes they want you to submit a CV or a resume. And so we'll talk about what the CV is, because some students don't know what it is, and how to write an effective one. So we encourage you and invite you to participate in those last two events for the fall in this graduate series. So we're going to go ahead and push you into breakout rooms now so that you can ask any additional questions that you have. And I just want to again thank you for joining us this evening. And we really hope that you gained a lot of information from this session that will help you move forward in your application process. Have a good night.